is difficult to imagine the Philippine educational landscape without the private schools. The private schools help the state fulfill its mandate of making quality education accessible to all Filipinos. It is in recognition of this role that the Fund for Assistance to Private Education, a permanent trust fund for private education, was established through Executive Order 156 on November 5, 1968. The Private Education Assistance Committee, or the PEAC, was created as the trustee of the fund. The PEAC is composed of the Secretary of Education as the ex officio chair and a representative each from the National Economic Development Authority, Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines, Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities, and Association of Christian Schools, Colleges, and Universities. For the development of private education, the PEAC takes on the role of funder, advocate, partner, and enabler. A national secretariat headed by an executive director executes the policies, programs, and initiatives of the PEAC for private education. In 1989, a landmark piece of legislation, RA 6728, or the Government Assistance to Students and Teachers in Private Education, or GAITF, was passed. The GAITF Act, which was amended by RA 8545 in 1998, institutionalized government assistance to private education in the country. The Educational Service Contracting, or ESC, Teacher Salary Subsidy, or TSS, Senior High School Voucher Program, the In-Service Training, or INSET, and Research are part of the Department of Education's GAITF program. The PEAC implements the GAITF program given the track record of the PEAC in program management. The PEAC has been involved in the development of the ESC, from piloting a scheme, which was a precursor to the ESC in 1982 to 1986, to implementing the ESC in 1986 to 1991, and from 1996 up to the present. The ESC today has close to 1 million beneficiaries. Part of the PEAC infrastructure for the GAITF program is the Regional Secretariat. The PEAC-RS is headed by the Regional Program Director, who designates a Regional Program Coordinator for the day-to-day program implementation in the region. The PEAC has the following responsibilities in the GAITF program: orientation, ESC certification, SHS voucher applications, processing, monitoring, resolving cases of schools with adverse findings, regular meetings and consultations with stakeholders, research and data gathering, in-service training. The PEAC is also accredited as a local continuing professional development, or CPD, provider by the Professional Regulation Commission, or PRC. Participants of the INSET programs offered by the PEAC have the opportunity to earn the required CPD units for the renewal of their professional licenses. From 2012 to 2017, the PEAC trained a total of more than 70,000 junior high school teachers, and since 2016, an estimated 17,000 SHS teachers. The PEAC also implements its own programs of assistance. The Assistance to Programs and Initiatives to Reform Education, or ASPIRE, gave funding support in the amount of 33.7 million to 99 projects of private educational associations since 2015 to 2016. The Research for School Improvement Towards Excellence has assisted 79 private school administrators and teachers writing their theses and dissertation since 2015 to 2016. The Dissemination Assistance to Research and Education, or DARE, has supported 16 faculty members who presented their papers in international conferences abroad since it was launched in 2016 to 2017. The Philippine Education Research Journal is an online resource for decision makers, policymakers, and practitioners in education. Its editorial board consists of highly respected educators and researchers. The Philippine Education Conference is an opportunity for school administrators and teachers to learn from educational leaders and experts here and abroad as they discuss educational issues, concerns, trends, and innovations. Recognizing the inherent strengths of the private schools in achieving excellence in Philippine education, the PEAC is committed to promoting private education as an integral part of our educational system.
Good morning, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Ako po si Doris Ferrer, Executive Director of the Private Education Assistance Committee. Magandang umaga po sa lahat ng senior high school teachers, coordinators, and principals who for the last 4 years have been writing the history of senior high school in the country. I am as excited as you are for today's webinar, which kicks off the webinar series for senior high school. To put in context what PAC is doing, you all know as a matter of fact that in the third week of April, we conducted a survey on school recovery and readiness for school year 2020-2021. And when we studied the results, we saw that upskilling and reskilling of teachers is one of the most crucial imperatives. Our teachers will have to depart from face-to-face delivery, thus flexible classes, which in effect is creating a new normal because it cannot be business as usual. Yesterday, I was in a webinar titled Moving the Guideposts, and this articulated my resonance with Winston Churchill, which is that we cannot waste a good crisis. So at this point, allow me to introduce, to facilitate this morning session, and to make sure that we do not waste the opportunities presented to us by this crisis. Our lead speaker is a specialist in curriculum development, education management and administration, research and data analysis. She's also an expert in monitoring, evaluation, and facilitation, and graduated with a degree in Bachelor of Secondary Education major in Mathematics from Ateneo de Davao University. She has a Master of Arts in Teaching Mathematics from the University of the Philippines in Diliman, and a PhD in Educational Management from Ateneo de Davao University. She is an accreditor of the Philippine Accrediting Association of Schools, Colleges, and Universities since 2015, and currently, she is the Academic Vice President of Ateneo de Davao University and the Senior High School Inset Consultant of the Private Education Assistance Committee. I'm very happy that we have as a lead facilitator for the entire webinar series for senior high school, Dr. Gina Lapazan Montalan. Good morning. Co-facilitating the webinar this morning is Mr. Rex Rolla. He graduated cum laude with a degree in AB Philosophy with units in Education and Sociology, also from Ateneo de Davao University. He took his MA in Philosophy at Ateneo de Manila University and is currently finishing his PhD in Educational Management from Ateneo de Davao University. At present, he is a member of the Philosophy Faculty and of the Education Faculty of Ateneo de Davao. He is also a PAC trainer for senior high school in-service training. Friends, let's all welcome Mr. Rex Rolla. Good morning.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session of our senior high school webinar series. In this session, we aim to coach you how to prepare and create your flexible class to continue mentoring our senior high school learners amid the public health situation because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Allow me to share my screen with you to walk you through on how to prepare and create your flexible classes. Okay, so in preparing you or in helping you how to prepare your flexible class, it is necessary for us to recall first how we coach you together with the national trainers of our senior high school core subjects in preparing, I mean, your core classes. After that, we are going to bring you to another layer of preparation with the new normal. And in this coaching, we're going to help you how to plan your class in the new normal and in creating your class in the new normal. So as I said, it is necessary for us to bring you back first on how we coach you in preparing your senior high school core subject classes in the old normal. So we have to remember then that whether we will be in the new normal or in the old normal, it is necessary that in preparing our classes, we have to target achieving the K-12 program outcomes. And we are always reminded that in this K-12 program outcomes, any senior high school graduate, or shall we say basic education completer, must be ready to proceed to any of the 4 exits of the K-12 program. And for them to be prepared for that, it is necessary that our basic education completer or senior high school graduate must have this competency. Must be able to produce all forms of text based on solid grounding on Philippine experience and culture, an understanding of the self, community, and nation, application of critical and creative thinking and doing processes, competency in formulating ideas, arguments logistically, scientifically, and creatively, and of course, based on clear appreciation of one's responsibility as a citizen of a multicultural Philippines and a diverse world. In short, for any senior high school graduate, we have to ensure that their communication skills are fully developed before they proceed to the 4 exits of our K-12 program. Secondly, any senior high school graduate must be able to systematically apply knowledge, understanding, theory, and skills for the development of the self, local, and global communities using prior learning, inquiry, and experimentation. This would imply that they have to have developed their thinking skills before they will be able to complete the basic education. And in that case, the senior high school is the last of the 3 layers of our basic education. The third is that they have to work comfortably with relevant issues or technologies that develop adaptations and innovations for significant use in local and global communities. In short, they must have the skill on technology, the skill in using technology. And the fourth one is they must be able to communicate with local and global communities with proficiency orally, in writing, and through new technologies of communication. That would imply that any senior high school graduate must have a communication and technology skills. And lastly, our senior high school graduate must be able to interact meaningfully in a social setting and contribute to the fulfillment of individual and shared goals, respecting the fundamental humanity of all persons and the diversity of groups and communities. That would imply that our senior high school graduate must have developed their problem-solving skills. Meaning, for us to prepare our classes, particularly our core subjects, we have to ensure that all these 5 skills are developed, are being targeted in our core subject, in the teaching of our core subject. And these skills are communication, thinking, technology, the combination of communication and technology, and lastly, their problem-solving skills. So these are the things that we have to always put in our mind in preparing our classes. Either we are in the old normal, either we can still go back to the old normal, or if we will forward with all our preparations in the new normal. So, given this context, your senior high school trainers, national trainers, inform you that in preparing your classes, you have to anchor your preparation from what we call the alignment framework. It is necessary that any teacher who is going to teach his or her subject to learners must understand the reason why he or she is teaching the course. In understanding the reasons in teaching the course, the teacher must be able to articulate the goal in teaching the course, because by articulating this, the teacher will be able to understand the things that need to be emphasized in teaching the course in the group of students. The other one is the teacher must know the nature of the subject or the course. Knowing the nature of the subject will lead the teacher understand the appropriate strategies that will be employed in teaching the course to the learners. And of course, because this subject is part of the curricular program that is provided by a particular senior high school institution, and the curricular program of the senior high school institution reflects the mission, the vision, and the goals of that senior high school institution, then it is necessary for that teacher to understand the role of this subject in pursuing or in helping the realization of the mission of the school, the senior high school, in teaching the course. Once the teacher knows already the reason in teaching the subject or the course, the teacher will be guided then what to evaluate and what to assess in each of the learner in terms of learning the subject. And after knowing what are the things that need to be assessed and evaluated in every learner in context of the reason of teaching the subject to the learner, the teacher will be guided then the appropriate strategies that will be applied in teaching the subject. And so we bring you to the third layer of the framework, which is what we call how to teach. And because the teacher knows very well the reasons in teaching the subject, the teacher would know which of the lined up topics will be given more emphasis in the teaching of the subject. And that brings us to the fourth layer of the alignment framework, which we call what to teach. In this what to teach, you were told by your national senior high school trainers that it is necessary for you to know the scope and sequence of your topics. You have to sequence your topics in accordance to the reasons that you have articulated in teaching the subject. That is in the old normal. Coming from this alignment framework, we brought you to what we call the ACID plan, or the Aligned Classroom Instruction Delivery Plan. Putting this framework into a plan, we have provided you what we call the Aligned Classroom Instruction Delivery Plan, or which you now use as a buzzword, the ACID plan. Coming from this ACID plan, to put all this together in a document so you can start planning your subject, teaching your subject in the old normal, your senior high school national trainers have given you information how to make use of a classroom instruction delivery alignment map to ensure that every activity that you provide in your class are all aligned to the reason in teaching your subject. This is in the old normal. This is how we coach you in preparing your lessons, your teaching guides in context of the old normal, wherein you still have your in-person classes with your students. Now, the question is, how were we able to help you appropriate this classroom instruction delivery alignment map in preparing the teaching guide? We know that the teaching guide is equivalent to a lesson plan. So again, coming from the alignment framework, we say that if the teacher knows the reason in teaching the subject, the teacher will be guided appropriately the activities that can be afforded to the students in the enrichment, in the evaluation, and even in the practice sets. And because the teacher knows this now, the teacher is now guided on the strategies that will be afforded in teaching the subject. And of course, the teacher is well guided how to introduce and to motivate the students to be involved in the active discussion of the topic in discussing the topic in an in-person class modality. But now we are in a new context. We are now in what we call the new normal. So how are we supposed to prepare your senior high school core subject class in the new normal? As I mentioned earlier on, whether we are in the old normal or in the new normal, it is necessary that we have to remind ourselves in preparing our classes of the outcomes, the K to 12 program outcomes. So always remember that we always have to target all those skills. So how do we prepare you now? Or how do we coach you now in preparing your class in the new normal? First, it is necessary for us to know, to be informed of what is class like in the new normal. First, we have to have this context. We have to understand this context. That first and foremost, in continuing the education of our learners, in continuing mentoring our learners, our senior high school learners, the primary thing that we have to consider is the safety of our learners. And of course, your safety also. The second one is, it is necessary that we have to understand that even with the new normal, even with our struggles now in the academics, it is necessary for us to understand that the education of our senior high school learners must continue. It should not be stopped. So given this, can we still hold in-person class? I put here a question mark because we are not certain on when we will be able to hold the in-person class, on when we can go back to our old normal. What we are concerned about is that we have to take care of the safety of our learners while continuing mentoring to learn from our course, from our subject. The fourth one is, if we cannot hold in-person in the new normal most of the time, that would imply that we have to resort to accessing technology. But the question is, what's the what's the what's the what's the context of this in terms of the students' accessibility to this technology? Do they have a strong Wi-Fi connection? Can they be able to access the technology? Do they have laptops? Do they have all these technologies? I put here a question mark because I know that in every senior high school institution, we have varying contexts. So this is the context that we have to consider in helping you or in coaching you prepare your senior high school core subject class in the new normal. So, given all this context, given all these things, it is necessary that we have to bring our students to a flexible class to continue mentoring them, learn from us. And when we say flexible class, there are varying options for this, for students learning. One is an online option. The second one is a distance option. And the third one is a blended student learning option. Given all these options of the flexible class, I think it is necessary for us first to differentiate these three So we would know which of this will best fit in our context. So differentiating these three options, it is necessary that we have to differentiate them in context of instruction, students learning, assessment of students learning. I call this one as ISLA, instruction, S and L stands for the students learning, and A stands for the assessment of students learning. In an online flexible learning option, the instruction will be provided through media connectivity, through internet, radio maybe, or TV broadcast. But for a distance flexible learning option, the instruction will happen through media connectivity still, but this time there's an added one. That is the use of modules that can be accessed offline. For blended flexible learning option, the instruction will happen still through media connectivity, but this time we pair this one with in-person classes. How about for the students learning? The students learning happens in an online flexible learning option through an individual pace of learning. This is by accessing e-learning materials, radio and TV broadcasted lectures. For the distance flexible learning option, students learning will happen still through individual pace of learning, but this time there is an added one, which is the use of offline access modules. For the blended flexible learning option, the students learning happens still using the individual pace principle of learning, that is using the e-learning materials, accessing radio and TV broadcasted lectures, the offline access modules, but there can be also an on-campus classes for this flexible learning option. How about the assessment of students learning? Well, to me, either it will be for an online flexible learning option or for a distance flexible learning option or a blended flexible learning option. It is because we cannot coach the learning of our students every day through an in-person class. Then the assessment of students' learning must be done through a performance-based assessment. A summative assessment that is performance-based. I know that you are very much familiar with the performance task, but before a student completely can complete a performance task, it is necessary that the student must have completed enabling tasks or the performance checks. In this case, your performance checks or your enabling tasks can become your formative assessment activities in preparation to the completion of the performance-based or what we call the performance task summative assessment. So this is how we should understand the three learning options of the flexible learning. Given this differentiation of the three options of flexible learning, I think it is also necessary that we have to know what are those things that we usually do in the in-person class but may not be true anymore in the flexible teaching learning class. This is necessary for us to understand first before we prepare our flexible learning class, because there are cases where the teacher brings the students to the flexible learning, yet the teacher is still using the in-person class methods. The moment the teacher will do that, problems will arise because the students will also evaluate the effectivity of your flexible teaching learning class in context of the comfort that they receive from the in-person class. They will be able to do that because the teacher brings them to a new modality, of teaching learning, yet still using the old modality of teaching learning. And so therefore, it is necessary for us to understand this first. So understanding the flexible teaching learning in context of the in-person or vis-a-vis the in-person teaching learning, it is necessary for us to understand the flexible teaching learning in context of the SILA, no longer the ISLA, the instruction, the student learning, and the assessment, but this time it's the SILA because the S stands for the schedule of classes, either the schedule of classes in here for the flexible teaching learning. We must understand that we will either have here an fewer in-person classes, or no fewer in-person classes at all. Whereas in the in-person teaching learning class, the schedule of classes are made equal to the number of in-person classes in a school year. In a flexible teaching learning class, the instruction is not or mostly not on campus face-to-face interaction with students. But in the in-person teaching learning class, the instruction is of course on campus face-to-face interaction with students. In a flexible teaching learning class, learning generally happens based on individual student space. We have to mentor individually our students. We have to check the progress of their learning individually. But in the in-person teaching learning class, whether we like it or not, because they come to our class as a whole class, we are tempted to monitor the learning of the class in terms of the average learning of the whole class. In the flexible teaching learning class, the assessment of learning is monitored based on individual students' pace of learning. But in the in-person teaching learning class, the assessment of learning is generally monitored as a class. As I mentioned earlier on, we are always tempted to monitor the progress of learning of our students as a class, and we always check the average performance of the class. But for the flexible teaching learning, this can no longer be done, because if you are going to do this, you will be bombarded with a lot of problems to face coming from your students. Therefore, your assessment must be done in context of the individual pace of learning of your student. Now that we are reminded of what a flexible teaching learning environment is compared to the in-person environment, and now that we know the differentiation of the three options of a flexible learning, I think we are now prepared to bring you, or you are now prepared to be coached on how to prepare a flexible class. When we say flexible class, always remember that you've got three options. You can either have an online class, a blended class, or a distance class. So how do we prepare you for that? First, always remember that in a flexible teaching learning environment, your schedule varies. The flexible teaching learning has either no or fewer in-person classes in a school year. The instruction is mostly not on campus face-to-face interaction with your students. And that learning generally happens based on individual student space, and that assessment of learning is monitored based on individual student space. Given the context, I still would like to remind you that you have to articulate the reason in teaching your subject. Because as I mentioned earlier on, whether you are in the new normal or in the old normal, it is necessary that you have to fully articulate the reason in teaching your subject. Why? Because when you know the reason in teaching your subject, you will know how to contextualize the teaching of your subject, either you are in the new normal or in the old normal. Therefore, I say to you to please articulate first the reason in teaching your subject. Because the moment you do that, you will be guided to identify the essential knowledge, the essential skills, and the essential attitude that you have to develop in every learner enrolled in your class. And the aggregate of these three essentials are what we call the competencies. These are the competencies that we need to develop in every learner who will be enrolled in our class. And once you have identified the essentials, you will be guided to identify the most essential topics. Of course, those things that you find in your curriculum guide are essential topics in helping you develop the essentials or the essential competencies in each of your learner. But because we expect to have fewer or even no in-person classes in a school year in teaching or in a term in teaching your subject, then it is necessary for us to identify which of those essential topics need to be emphasized, need to be taught to all learners enrolled in your class. And we are calling this as the most essential topics. Other than that, once you have already articulated the reason in teaching your subject and you have identified the most essential topics that need to be taught to your students in a particular term, then you will be able to determine the FAA. This FAA is the flexible assessment activities that will help you monitor the individual learner's pace of progress of learning. Of course, in this session, we will not have the details of this. It will be in our second webinar. The third one is, once you know now the flexible assessment activities that you are going to ask from your learners to work on so that they will be able to successfully complete your performance-based summative assessment in the form of a performance task, then you will also be guided on what to choose as your FLS. This is the flexible learning strategies. Again, in this session, we will not have the details of this, but it will be in the separate webinar. So, having all this in mind, having all this in preparing our flexible teaching learning, how are we supposed to start preparing our flexible teaching learning environment? Given our context now, it is very difficult to be coaching our teachers or to be coaching you to come up with a flexible teaching learning environment with a new document to follow on or a new template to follow on in preparing such a flexible learning class. That is why we still would like you to go back to your classroom instruction delivery alignment map, or which we call the SIDAM. From this SIDAM, we're going to appropriate our flexible teaching learning class preparation from this document and bringing you now to a new form of a SIDAM. So, having this, always remember that we will still make use of our alignment framework. We still have to know the reason in teaching our subject so that we will know what to assess and what to evaluate from our learners based on the things that they've learned from our subject, and so that we will know also how to teach the most essential topics to our learners in context of the flexible learning options. And so, in that case, we bring you now to what we call the Flexible Instructional Development Plan, or the FIDP. But as I warned you earlier on, this FIDP is not very much far from what you have been working on, which we call the SIDAM, or the Classroom Instruction Delivery Alignment Map. I personally don't want you to use a new document to prepare for your flexible learning class, because you have to have more time in the preparation rather than more time in understanding the document. And so given this, we bring you to this FIDP. If you notice here above, you're seeing the Classroom Instruction Delivery Alignment Map. But as I said, we are appropriating this now in context of the flexible classes. Therefore, we're now calling this as Flexible Instructional Delivery Plan, or the FIDP. And what are now the new features of this FIDP that are not found in the CDAM? Take note of the yellow ones in here. In the Flexible Instructional Delivery Plan, after articulating the content and the content standards, which are both found in your curriculum guide, it is necessary that you have to insert the third column for your most essential topics. And from these most essential topics, you proceed to the performance standards. Where do you find the performance standards? Of course, these are still coming from your curriculum guide. But how about the learning competencies now? Oh, well, your learning competencies will now have two classifications. You'll have the two sets of learning competencies. The complete set of learning competencies, and these are the learning competencies that are all found in your curriculum guide. But because you have now chosen from your curriculum guide your most essential topics, then it is just necessary that you have to articulate the learning competencies that are being targeted by these most essential topics. And we call this now as our most essential learning competencies. Okay? And of course, we still classify them in context of knowing, understanding, and doing. I know that you know that already, how to do it, because your senior high school trainers have coached you how to do it. But if in case you're new in the preparation of the CDAM that is now being migrated to the FIDP, well, we can still provide you a copy of our previous training, the presentation slides that we use in coaching teachers how to classify learning competencies in context of the KUD. How about for the assessment? For the assessment, we have a new feature in here in the Flexible Instructional Delivery Plan. Remember, in the flexible learning class, I emphasize that in any of the learning option, we must resort to the performance-based assessment. And so therefore, your students must be prepared to successfully complete this summative performance-based assessment, which we call the performance task. And in preparing them, they will be asked to also perform or complete the enabling tasks, or which we call the performance checks. And so therefore, in this column, we already have taken out the written works, the quarterly assessment, and the performance checks as the three classifications of our assessment techniques. Why? Because as I said, in the flexible learning class, we have to understand that your assessment must be based on a performance, must be performance-based. And so, the preparation must be in context of the enabling task. But will your enabling task can be still in the form of a written work? Yes, you can still have there a written work enabling task, but it should not be limited to the written works alone. That is the reason why we have stricken out the WW in here and the QA and PC. But instead, we put here now the flexible assessment activities and in context of the performance checks. How about our strategies? Oh, we have now the FLS, or the flexible learning strategies. And so those teaching strategies that you used to have for your in-person classes may no longer work this time. And so in that case, we are now bringing you to what we call the flexible learning strategies. For us to have a concrete example of this, please help me bring you to FID. Before review our IDP, is how it looks like. This is coming from the CDAM. So if you will tell me will the things that we have prepared from our SIDAM be completely scrapped? My answer in there is no. You just have to reappropriate your SIDAM to your flexible instructional delivery plan. By having what? By inserting the third column of the most essential topics, by having this most essential topics coming from the most essential learning competencies coming from the most essential topics, and or as dictated by your most essential topics, and in the assessment by putting in now your performance checks as your flexible assessment activities in helping your learners successfully complete the summative performance-based activity. And then for your strategies, we'll have here the flexible learning strategies. These two will be given in two separate webinars. Our task, my task in this session is just to inform you how you can make use or how you can maximize your SIDAM in preparing for a flexible learning class. And in this case, I am sharing with you now the reappropriated SIDAM in context of the new normal, in context of the flexible learning class, and we are now calling this one as the flexible instructional delivery plan. So, to give you a concrete example of this, allow me to share to you an excerpt of an FIDP and focusing only on one topic. So here, I would like to remind you that we still follow the alignment framework. This is coming from the Introduction to Philosophy of the Human Person, flexible learning class. Take note of the nature of this subject, the goal in teaching the subject, which informs you now on the essential skills that need to be developed. Take note that through the Introduction to Philosophy of the Human Person, the skills of students in problem solving and in thinking will be targeted in the teaching of the Introduction to Philosophy of the Human Person subject. Given this, you will be guided as to what are those things that you need your learners to do out of their learning. And this can be found in your culminating performance standard. Where can you find your culminating performance standard? Of course, it can still be found in your curriculum guide. Again, coming from the culminating performance standard, you will be guided on what performance task you will be asking from your student to complete at the end of the teaching of this subject. So in the performance task, it is necessary that you need to have articulated your transfer goal, and you have to have articulated also your performance scenario. So this is the performance task of this subject. Coming from this performance task, where the performance task has been developed in context of articulating or in context of the articulation of the things that need to be done out of learning by the student, and in context of articulating the nature and the goal of teaching the subject, which informs you now the skills that need to be developed. This all leads you to identifying the most essential topics. If you are going to check, if you are a teacher of this subject, you will notice that there are more than 8 topics that have been identified in the curriculum guide. But in this case, we limit it to 8, and these are the most essential topics. When we say most essential topics, these are the non-negotiable topics that will ensure the development of all these skills, which are articulated from the reason in teaching the course or the subject. So given all this now as our preliminary activity in preparing FIDP, here is now a sample of your FIDP for that subject. So in the first page, you have here your information of the subject. You have here the core subject title, the grade level where this can be taught, the semester, the number of hours, the prerequisite, there's no prerequisite for this, the core subject description, the culminating performance standard, the performance task, and you can also include in here your rubric in assessing your performance-based summative assessment, and even your enabling task. The second one, the second page, brings you now to the details of the FIDP, which I have shown you earlier on. This is a sample of an FIDP for one most essential topic. Here, the content is on doing philosophy. The content standard is that the learner understands the meaning and process of doing philosophy. The most essential topics are this: the holistic versus partial seeing, philosophizing as holistic seeing, and writing a philosophical reflection paper. What's the performance standard for this? It is that the learner reflects on a concrete experience in a philosophical way. And these are the complete set, this is the complete set of the learning competencies. But take note that by identifying the most essential topics, these complete learning competencies are now reduced into 3, from 4 to 3. So the first is retained, the second has been retained, but this is now combined with the third learning competency in here, while the fourth is also being retained. Now, because we say that the flexible learning class will be more adhering to a performance-based assessment, take note that your performance check in here, unlike in your in-person classes, you mostly identify performance checks like the written works. You also identify a quarterly assessment that can be carried out from each of this topic. But take note in here that for your performance check, this is now an aggregate of all the teaching or the teaching of all these topics. So you now have here the reflection paper on a concrete situation from a holistic perspective. The question is, will this be considered really as an enabling task that is aligned to our performance task? How are we supposed to understand our enabling task? Our enabling task must help our students to successfully complete the performance task. Let's go back to our performance task in here. Our performance task is that the student will be asked to come up with a reflection in here. So the transfer goal is that the learner can independently remain reflective about the depth and meaningfulness of human life through the different human experiences. For the scenario, the student will act as a concerned citizen who will write a letter to the editor of a newspaper about one's reflection on a current social issue, one's reflection. Therefore, it is necessary that the student, while preparing him or her to successfully complete this performance task, the student must be informed on what is a good reflection. No? What are the characteristics of a good reflection? So in here, we now have the reflection paper. So is this aligned with the summative performance task? The answer in there is, of course, yes. How about for the flexible learning strategies? Take note that we have identified in here the flexible learning strategies that will suit to the mentoring of our learners in learning the materials intended for holistic versus partial seeing, philosophizing as holistic seeing, and writing a philosophical reflection paper. So here we've got we are able to enumerate flexible learning strategies. For this, wherein it's more of a knowing, the learning competency is classified in here as knowing. Then we have here independent reading, and we can have even here a quiz, an online quiz as understanding check. And you can have here also a mini lecture and video interpretation aids or quick conceptualization question. All this will be given in details in a separate webinar. Then for the second, wherein the classification of this under the KUD is understanding, which covers now in the revised Bloom's taxonomy, the evaluating. Then we'll have here small group workshops with plenary and presentation on issue resolution. Can this be done online? Yes, we can do this also online. Can this be done in an in-person class under the blended learning modality or option? Yes, we can also do this. How about for a distance remote option? Well, for us to have here the small group workshop, maybe we can have an alternative of this under the distance learning option. Then, how about for the third? This is now more of the creating in the revised Bloom's taxonomy and classified as doing in the KUD classification. Then, this is our flexible learning strategy in mentoring our students to learn the materials for the writing a philosophical reflection paper. That is, having an individual draft essay writing with teacher comments for improvement. So, this is a sample of an FIDP, an excerpt of an FIDP for one topic. I guess by walking you through on the three options of flexible learning, by emphasizing to you that in a flexible learning, we have fewer in-person classes, or there can be no in-person classes. No? Remember the SILA, and then your instruction must be done individually, or the instruction must be accessed by your individual students in context of their individual pace of learning, and then their learning must be monitored individually, and your assessment must be performance-based. Having all those now in our mind, and by giving you a template to follow coming from the CDAM to an FIDP or a flexible instructional development plan to help you start planning your flexible learning. And by giving you also a sample, a concrete example of an FIDP coming from one topic, I believe you can now start planning your flexible learning class. But of course, with inputs coming from separate webinars on the details of assessment and the strategies. But as of the moment, you can already start working on that and filling in this up to this column. So since you are now somehow prepared to prepare for your flexible learning class, part of the preparation is, of course, to create your flexible learning class. And that brings you now to our second speaker, who is Mr. Rex Roll. So how do we prepare a flexible class? This will be given by our second speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Gina. Good morning to all our viewers on Facebook Live. I will be picking up where Ma'am Gina left off. Let me share my screen. The FIDP that Ma'am Gina showed you begins with the standards and works back from there because we follow the principle of beginning with the end in mind. Okay. What I am trying to do here is to show in more visual terms the interconnection among the performance standards. Hopefully, we get to have a glimpse of the thinking process that is necessary as preparation for the development of a flexible class. Okay. So with the FIDP, we begin with the big standards, and then we gradually break them up, no, into ever smaller standards, no, the first quarter performance, okay, the unit performance standards, until we arrive at the daily lesson. Okay. But when it comes to implementation, we reverse the movement. We begin by teaching the small lessons and then gradually building them up into ever bigger and bigger standards until we arrive at the culminating performance standard. So if you look at the culminating performance standard, then in philosophy, for example, the performance standard emphasizes the doing of philosophy of the human person as a whole. But this is a culminating performance standard. It's something that we expect our students to be able to perform at the end of the semester. In the meantime, we have to break it down into quarterly performance standards. And in this case, okay, for the first quarter, it's still doing philosophy of the human person, but this time we just limit it to the person as an embodied being in the world and the environment, not the whole human person as is demanded in the culminating performance standard. Okay. And then the other half of the culminating performance standard we deliver in the second quarter. Okay. But even a quarterly performance standard, it's still a big task. In terms of a normal schedule that would cover about 10 weeks of lessons. So part of the challenge now is to also break it down into even smaller details. Okay? So the quarterly performance standard, doing philosophy of the human person as embodied being in the world, is subdivided into, in the case of philosophy, 4 units. The first quarter has 4 units. And then the second quarter also has 4 units. So the first unit performance standard is on doing philosophy as reflection. Okay. So if you notice, we want the student to be able to do philosophy about the human person, but the only way they can do that is if they know first how to reflect. Okay? Now, in the normal schedule, the first unit performance standard would have been good for at least 2 weeks of classes. With the new normal, there has been a reduction towards 1 week. I understand this to mean not that the semester has been shortened, but that there would be no longer that there would be longer intervals between lessons to account for the learner's learning conditions at home. So this first unit performance standard, it's still 1 week of classes. Okay? So we can go even further into details. If one looks at the first unit performance standard, one can understand it better, okay, when one looks at the content standard, what is it about doing philosophy that we want our students to learn? The content standard tells us that, okay, in doing philosophy, our emphasis is really that they understand the meaning and process of doing philosophy. And that gets broken down even further into the learning competencies. Okay? As was shown by Ma'am Gina earlier, and this is what I'm now trying to break down, okay? The content standard talks about the learner needing to understand the meaning of doing philosophy. In the curriculum guide, the meaning of doing philosophy is broken down into 3 learning competencies. Distinguish the holistic perspective from a partial point of view. That is the requisite information that the students need to pick up. When they get to do that, they have to recognize, they have to analyze human activities, okay, and see how holistic perspective and partial perspective can be experienced. And then the third element is really being able to realize that philosophy is about the holistic perspective. The second element of the content standard is about the process of doing philosophy, and the fourth learning competency focuses on that one. The students must, in the end, be able to do a philosophical reflection. When they do that, then they can perform the quarterly performance task, which is about doing philosophy applied to the human person as an embodied being, in the world. When they do that, they can also already do the culminating performance task, which is about doing a philosophical reflection of the human person as a whole. So you see, as we move, okay, into greater detail, we can see the presence of alignment between standards at the culminating the culminating level, and standards at the competencies level. The task for us is to understand what those learning competencies demand. And one way to do that is to look at the KUD classifications that they belong to, and the revised Bloom's taxonomy of skills that they represent. So in the case of the first competency, it's understanding. Now, in the most essential learning competencies published by DepEd recently, 1.2, recognize human activities that emanated from deliberate reflection, was not included. That doesn't mean that this learning competency is not to be taught anymore. Instead, what I understand is the intention of DepEd for the most essential learning competencies is to encourage us to teach 1.2 not anymore as a distinct lesson, but as a lesson to be integrated when teaching 1.1 and in teaching 1.3. Okay? So one can teach holistic perspective from partial point of view, and then look at human activities as examples. When also equating philosophy with holistic perspective, one can also make use of the analysis of human activities as basis. Okay? Once we have identified this KUD classification and RBT levels, okay, then we are helped into understanding the most essential topics that we need to teach. Okay? The learning competencies teach us that the most essential topics to be taught are really about holistic and partial seeing. 1.3 tells us that here we need to define what philosophy is. And it's defined as holistic seeing. And then we have to teach also how this holistic seeing is to be done. And usually in philosophical classes, this would mean teaching students how to write a reflection paper. Okay. When we do that, once we have specified them all, then we work out the performance checks and the flexible learning strategies, as pointed out by Ma'am Gina already earlier. So we see, for example, that the learning competency of distinguishing a holistic perspective from a partial point of view can be taught. Well, at least the way I designed it, I will use 4 learning strategies. First, I will allow students to do independent reading of a text that I will upload online, which they can read online or which they can download for offline reading. You see, our emphasis here is on blended learning, not fully online learning, because our internet infrastructure, our current ICT level in the Philippines really does not allow for a fully online class. And so we make use of the blended strategy. In this case, we can upload materials online. The internet becomes simply our means of delivering the lessons, but the learning process may happen offline for the students. So after they read, they have to know if they understood anything from what they've read. And so we may supply them with an auto-graded quiz. Now, auto-graded quizzes would be a little bit more difficult to implement offline, but if they are done online, it can be done. Okay, students go for a short period of time they go online. They take the quiz just to check if they understood what they've read. Immediately after taking the quiz, they will know that whether they got a passing score, which indicates readiness to move on to the next learning competency, or if they are not yet ready to move on to the next competency, and so they have to do more independent reading and then retake the quiz. Third, once they pass the quiz, a third strategy that I introduce is really the introduction of a mini lecture and some videos as aids to interpretation. Yes, students can understand, but we don't just want them to understand at a superficial level. And so we can aid in deepening the understanding by providing a mini lecture and some videos from YouTube that will help them in interpreting. The lecture that I have designed will be done in Google Slides, so it's online and can be saved in Google Drive, but it can be accessed online and downloaded for offline reading. Now, the challenge, however, when it comes to Google Slides as lecture is that they must not be treated simply as visual aids, but should instead be treated as representations of the teacher lecturing. And I will show you later what kind of Google Slides I have prepared. No? The teacher's script should accompany the bullet points and images that we usually associate with presentation slides. For the YouTube videos, links will be provided to students for them to access. The second learning competency that they need to develop will be taught by way of collaborative learning, no? Small group workshops. Here, I'll be using Google Slides again, but instead of providing it to them as individual copies, it will be available as a shared document. Here, they'll be analyzing a song and resolving an issue, and then they will collaborate towards the resolution of the issue, no? Where they can work together, not necessarily at the same time. No? Here, they can work collaboratively in an asynchronous way. No? They just contribute. No? They may prepare their contributions offline and then they go online, and then the system will just automatically synchronize, no, what they have prepared. And then I will ask them to go for plenary presentations. Well, it can be done in a synchronous manner, wherein they will, how do you put it? Wherein we'll go on a video conference, perhaps using Google Meet or Zoom or whatever is available for all. Or it can also be done in an asynchronous way, just like when you do threaded discussions, conversations in Facebook. No? You post, somebody comments, somebody replies. It can be done, and it can work by as a plenary presentation of the small group workshops. Finally, for the individual draft essay, I will be using Google Docs, where each student can work on their skill of writing a philosophical reflection paper. And then the teacher does not even have to wait for the end of the paper to be written before he can look into the process. While the writing is being done by the student, the teacher can come in and comment on the writing, so that these drafts can still be improved. The final version of the paper will serve as the performance check, of course. Okay. Now let us see how this translates in Google Classroom. Why do I use Google Classroom? Well, we are not really strange to the idea of a flexible class. Okay. In the Philippines, the Moodle has been a favorite tool, but the Moodle, of course, is available only for schools with learning management systems. How about for small schools that do not have such an infrastructure in place? The Moodle wouldn't work. There's also the other possibility, no? The Microsoft Teams. But Microsoft Teams requires that students and teachers be enrolled in a school email address. But again, small schools will have that problem. And so I will use instead, I would recommend, especially for small schools, the use of Google Classroom. Because you see, Google Classroom, there is the Classroom for Education, where schools are required to enroll, no, to Google. But it's also possible to do Google Classroom in using the free Gmail accounts that we have. Okay. Let me give you an idea of how that works. Now, this is a Google Classroom, okay, and I'm using it with a free Gmail account. Okay. Now, one of the big challenges with doing let me do a new share. Okay. The Google Classroom can be used with a local, with a free Gmail account. And almost everybody has a free Gmail account. Okay. What we can work with is, you see, you can use a Google Classroom with a school account. It would have more privileges, but you can do it with a free Gmail account. And all you need to do is you can go to the waffle, the Google Apps menu, and then look for the icon for the Google Classroom. Once you've clicked that, then you will go to this main page. I have already created one class, but we can create other classes. Here you get to see that you can create a class when you are in teacher mode. Students can only join classes. Teachers can create classes. Once classes are created, you will be brought into the main page of the Google class that you have created. One of the first things you need to do, of course, would be set up the details for such a class. You can put in the class name, in this case, Introduction to Philosophy of the Human Person. You can put in class description. Okay? Now, what is important, however, is to set it up. Would you like your students to be able to communicate with you and with each other inside the Google Classroom? Okay? Just like you would have allowed members of your Facebook account to post and comment, then you can set it up so that they can comment, they can post, or if you don't want them to post or comment. There's also another element here. You can set up grade calculation. Okay? And then, for example, here I have put in the grade categories for summative assessment that DepEd puts as the standard. So let us say for a senior high school core subject, there are 3 grade categories: written work, performance task, and quarterly assessment. I can put in the weights. In our case, 25% for written work, 50% for performance task, or 25% for quarterly assessment, with the possibility that if everything will just become performance check, you can easily edit the percentages. You can even add grade categories if you like. Now, once that is done, save the class. Now, in this class, there are 4 tabs that you can meet. Okay? There is the stream tab, where this is the classroom. This is where you and your students meet and talk. Okay? You can post. You can post for all students, or depending on the number of students that you have, you may even just post for some students. You can do that. Okay? And then there is the classwork page. The classwork page is really where you prepare all your materials and all your activities for delivery to the students. Okay? You can save them as draft when classes still have not started. We'll come back to this later. The third tab is that of the people tab, where you can add co-teachers and you can add students. This is where you populate your classroom. And then the fourth tab is your grade book or class record. Later on, we'll see how this works. Let's go back to the classwork. With the classwork, you have here, okay, you have the link to a Google Calendar, which allows you to schedule your activities or even to see your own and your students' schedules, what dates and times students need to submit some activities, for example, or if you have an online video conference being scheduled, this is where you can schedule them. And then the class drive folder gives an idea. This is where everything about the class can be stored. Now, you can be assured that whatever you see in your own class drive, students do not immediately see, okay, until you share it to them. In the classwork page also, there is the create button where you can create assignments, quizzes, quick questions, materials, or even just reuse anything of the above that you have already created. And then you can also organize your materials according to to certain topics. For example, I like to organize according to content. Some would like to organize according to schedules. For example, instead of preliminaries, first quarter, 100 doing philosophy, instead of doing that, they may use instead week 1, week 2, week 3. Or others would say, okay, would create topics according to type of materials or activities. Let's try to create one. Let us say, I would like to create a topic for references. Okay, so I create the add topic and then I just type the label and then I add. Okay, where do I find it? It's when created. Wait, where did it go? Ah, there. Any topic that you create immediately, okay, is created on top. Now, would I like it to stay on top, or would I like to transfer it after preliminaries? All I need to do is click on it. I will not release, and then I will drag. For references, I like to put them on top so that students can easily access them. Now, let's try to populate these references. I will, for example, create materials. Let us say I will, for material, I would say, okay, YouTube links. Okay. And then I have a choice. Do I have the material already in my Google Drive? Do I have a link ready? Is it something I can upload, or is it still in YouTube? Let us say it's still in YouTube. I will click the add YouTube video. I can say, for example, let me look for the link in YouTube. Let us say I'm interested in the philosophy and Parasite, the movie. Google Classroom will search for the YouTube, and then, okay, I'm interested, for example, in this Parasite 2019 philosophical movie review by Dr. John McAteer. So I'll select it and then add it. Now it's available. Okay, the link to the YouTube video is now available to my students. Okay, I may also want to add, let us say, a reading material. I may have already prepared something on Google Drive. So, okay, I click insert files using Google Drive, and then let us say, okay, I will put in, let us say the senior high school curriculum guide, put it in. The link is there. Students now can easily access them. Okay, and then I will check. Okay, will it be available to all students? Okay, under what topic do I put it? So I'll put it under references. Okay, and then I can already post it. Once it's posted, then students can easily see them the moment that they are added to the class. Okay. Now, let me go through to the other elements of my class. Let's go straight to, okay. In the preliminary sections, of course, I have included a welcome file. It's like a start here type of first day orientation to the students, where using Google Slides, I provide how the class is to be navigated, how the course is to be navigated, because I want my students to be partners in the learning process. I will also share with them my instruction delivery plan. Okay. And then I will also subdivide my class into first quarter and second quarter. Okay. For the first quarter, I put in 2 elements. I add a first quarter overview, just so that the students already also know why they are taking up this quarter with this many units. Let us say I just put in the performance standard, I put in the topics, no? I put in, and then because I don't want my students to just disregard this. And so what I did was instead of simply creating this as material, what I did with the first quarter overview was ask it as a question. I created a question. When I created a question, what happens is that, let's look at the moment that I create a question. So I put in the title. I have a choice. Do I put in short answer or multiple choice? So this is really for quick answers that I want to have. So I put in the instructions, and then I ask them, are you ready to begin this lesson? I can put in a short answer type, and then they would provide their answer, or I can put in multiple choice. In some of my classes, originally, I put in yes and no. And then there's this one student who clicked no. He's not ready. And so I asked him, why are you not, why did you say no? And then he said, are you really not ready? And then he says, no, sir. I just want to know what happens if I click the no choice. And then how would I know when he is ready? I have to create another question. So what I did instead was, instead of providing a no option, I just put in the yes option, so that if they're not ready, then they don't do anything. If they are ready, then they click yes. Okay. I don't have to create another question to ask them about their readiness. Okay. And then, for what class is it to be created? Who are the students who make it up? Okay. It's ungraded. Would I like a due date? For example, I may want them to be ready at the latest August 31. Okay. Now, if I put that in, that will be a prompt to them. But what if they're not yet ready and August 31 is already gone by. Well, they can still answer, but there will now be a notice that the question was answered after the deadline. Okay, and then I put in the topic under which the material belongs. It's first quarter, and then because I'm not yet ready to ask it to the students, they haven't started the class yet. Instead of asking it then, I have three options, really. I'll ask it now, schedule it sometime later, or save it as draft. In the meantime, let's just save it as draft. Okay. Now, when that is done, I also make sure that in my first quarter, I also already include my first quarter assessment. You see, because the first quarter assessment is just a portion, the half of the culminating performance task, then the first quarter assessment is really just the culminating performance task qualified for the first quarter. So in this case, for example, if you remember in the presentation from Gina, the performance task for philosophy that we prepared was really a letter to the editor where they would be doing philosophy about a current social issue in the Philippines. Because we created this in February, COVID was not yet an issue, but now we can add COVID to the issue. And then we say, okay, do the letter to the editor, but not about human life as a whole, but only in relation to the lesson about the first quarter. Okay, and then I even included. It's possible to also add a rubric for the assessment. So given Ma'am Gina earlier showed you a rubric, and then say, okay, for a 100-point assessment, okay, so these are the rubrics. Students can see the rubrics, and it will guide them in their preparation. Okay. Here, the first quarter assessment that I used, I created an assignment instead of a simple question. I created the assignment, and then I added a document, a Google document, where they can now put in their letter to the editor. I make sure that every student has a copy. You see, when you do this, instead of just waiting for the students to upload a file, the Google Classroom will immediately create a folder in the Google Drive for this particular assignment, and every student will have a copy where the name of the assignment and the name of the student become the file names. So you don't have to worry anymore about whose paper is this, what assignment is this. No, Google Classroom will immediately do that for you. Okay, and then, for example, in this case, it's an assignment for the category of quarterly assessment, and then I say, okay, it's good for 100 points. Okay, when that is done, let's just save it as draft. And then we go to the unit level. Again, for the unit level, I provide the overview, and then the schedule and the readiness check. But let me introduce you to the elements. So how do we teach the content, let us say, of philosophy in Google Classroom. So what I did was I created an assignment. I gave it the title, okay, Sales on the Beginning of Philosophy. Okay, so I provide the instructions. Read about the text. Okay, so I provided the text. It's available online. Okay, so they can easily read it. It's just 2 paragraphs. Philosophical texts do not have to be long. Okay, and then okay, I make sure that each student has a copy, and then for them to be able to check on their understanding, I provide a quiz using Google Forms. Okay, you see, Google provides options for us to create documents, slides, spreadsheets, drawings, and forms for surveys and for quizzes. Okay? When they are, okay, here is a sample of the quiz that I made. Okay? I make sure that the first page does not immediately show the quiz questions. So I ask for the email address, the name, the section, and then I put them as required questions. Especially if you have many sections, it would be helpful when your students can be grouped according to sections. It will be helpful with checking and with grading later on. Okay, and then here are the questions. I can do a quiz that's multiple choice. And what I did here was that whenever the student gives a wrong answer, okay, let's look at the answer key. The answer key for this is here. The principle is water. Okay, I can put in I can put in feedback for incorrect answers and also for correct answers. And then what I did was just to make sure that they do not just do the quizzes without having read anything. What I did was, if ever they chose the wrong question, they will immediately be asked to submit the form. And then they will get a failing mark. And then they will say, okay, what did I do wrong? So that was the wrong answer. And then they go back to reading, okay, until finally, after many retakes, they get to provide the right answer. Okay. Now, not only is it possible to do a multiple choice type of quiz, one can also have a short answer type of quiz, no? Open-ended short answer type of quiz where the correct answer could also be provided. In this case, okay, let's say there is a correct answer. If they get the answer wrong, then okay, the quiz will tell them after they have submitted. Okay. Now, I also made sure that it's a required question. What it means is that if ever they do not answer this, then they won't be allowed to move on to the next question. Okay. Once they're done with the quiz, then they submit it. Then they get their scores. If they fail, then they need to read again and retake the quiz. Okay. We can do that with Google Quizzes. One disadvantage with free Google Classroom as compared to the Google Classroom associated with schools is that you cannot import grades from Google Forms. In other words, you can check and score quizzes in Google Forms, but when you transfer the grades to Google Classroom, you have to do it manually. Okay, that's one big, but it's a small price to pay for a free classroom anyway. Now, not only do I provide lectures, materials to read and quizzes. I also make sure that they would be given the opportunity to um, express their own insights. But to do that, okay, I've already asked them to read. They've already passed their the level of understanding that the quiz required. But then, okay, I want to level up the interpretation of the text, and so I supply them with videos that they can watch. A 5-minute video, for example, or this one is a 6-minute video that will help them with the interpretation. And then I also provided my own lecture. And I warned you earlier about how with lectures, we in offline classes, in offline classes, okay, in-person classes, the lecture slides that we use are simply visual aids. Okay, and so they may simply be images, or they may be, let us say, bullet points, and then the teacher comes in to talk about and elaborate on the images or the bullet points. In online and blended online classes, however, we are not there unless you are to do the lecture online using video conferences, but that would be too demanding on the students. So one way we can do lectures in an offline way is that we use the Google Slides as like a storybook, where not only do we include the important images and phrases, we also already include our narratives, perhaps even our side comments, so that when they read, okay, when they go through the slides, they would go through it as they would a storybook. Okay? The slides can now take the place of the teacher. Now, when that is done, of course, I would ask them to answer in a few sentences, perhaps, no, the insights that they gained out of reading the lectures that I prepared and watching the videos that I linked them to. Okay, I make sure that the students can reply to each other. Okay, I make sure that students can edit their answers. It's ungraded, so it's a formative assessment, really, and therefore really for it's really a teaching strategy then. Okay. Now, and then for the third learning competency, I want them to also do collaborative work, and so they can do a workshop. In this case, I said, okay, a workshop on perspectives. I would ask them to listen to a Johnny Mitchell song, and then they work out the analysis and the evaluation, no, using a collaborative slide. So workshop instructions are there, and then they would provide their answers here. Okay. Now, because these are workshops, I would like to make sure that, okay, only small groups do the work. Okay. Oh, okay. So for this, for example, I would just assign it to a few students, not to all. Okay. And then here, I will create other workshop slides for the others. So let us say, okay, I may attach another song for them. Okay. Another song. Now, let me introduce you to the idea of the reuse post. Let us say I want to create a fourth workshop group. Okay. So let me use reuse post. Okay. And then let us say I will use, technical issue. I will use workshop perspective 1. Okay. I will reuse it and assign it to a different group. Okay. I can do that. So I don't have to create everything again. I'll just say, okay, this is workshop on perspectives 4. Okay. And then I will assign it to a different group of students. I'll make sure, okay, that the slides can be edited by the student. Okay. So it's different from make a copy for each student because I want it to be collaborative. No? So I choose students can edit the file. I provide them with the rubrics for grading their workshop outputs. Okay. And then I will assign it. Okay. So there it is, what we have created. Okay. And then we'll just transfer it, click and drag. Now we have workshop on perspectives 4. Okay. And then I use the question type for the plenary presentation. So here, one of the group members may be asked to provide the answer, and then whatever answer the group gets, the other groups may also comment. So now we have a plenary presentation. And then finally, the unit performance check. The unit performance check, a reflection paper. Again, at the unit level, I use the same scenario that I have prepared for the entire semester for the culminating performance task. But this time, I just limit the scope of the paper to a demonstration of the understanding of the issue. Not yet its resolution. The resolution will come later when they have lessons already on the human person. Okay. So what happens here is that every reflection paper that the student makes becomes a portion of the culminating performance task that they will submit at the end of the semester. Every unit becomes an opportunity to write a portion and therefore partially complete the entire assignment. Okay. Now, we have done that. We can do the same to the other units until we arrive at the conclusion. Okay. Once you have prepared your classes, then you'd be ready to invite your students. Okay. So you can just type their email addresses if you know them. Let's say, for example, okay, in this case, I have created a dummy account. Okay. I've created that. I invite. I wait for the student to reply, and then the student now gets to uh, is now enrolled in my class the moment that he accepts the invitation. Okay. Now, with assignments, one of the interesting things with Google Classroom is that we can accommodate the different paces of the students and the different needs of the students. We can practice differentiated learning. No? Because in this class, we're not ready with students. Let me just let me give you an example of here, for example, this is a Google Classroom 101 that I made for teachers. If you notice, many different assignments, the number of students to which the activities are assigned are different, because what I did here was that in the beginning, yes, everybody will have will be assigned the same things, but depending now on the number of people who have submitted their assignments, so here, depending on their number, then I get to assign new activities. For the rest who have not submitted earlier assignments, I will not assign them new activities, so that they won't be flooded with activities, which can be very demoralizing. So in this case, we can allow for the different paces of students by allowing them to be assigned their activities when they are ready for it. So this is one advantage over, let us say, in-person classes where students, ready or not, get the same lesson, get the same activities, and that's why the rate of failure increases. But here we can wait. Of course, we can't wait forever, but at least we can wait for the students to be ready before we assign them. In fact, we can also perhaps create different activities for different types of students. No? So here is a student, for example, who is a visual learner, so you prepare more visual type of activities. Here is a student who is more numerical, so you prepare numerical type of activities. Here's a student who is advanced, and so you assign him other activities that you might not have assigned normally to any student. Or you have here a student who needs more help. Okay, you add, you provide more helping activities. That's the advantage of Google Classroom. Now, I'm done with the presentation. I now turn you back to the PAC. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Rex.
You're welcome.
I'd like to invite Dr. Montalan for the Q&A. All right, we have several questions here. Okay, let's start with Dr. Montalan. Okay, we have some big terms that we used in this webinar, and we've been using also in the inset. Some of our viewers have attended the senior high school inset, while we may have viewers who have not really attended the senior high school inset in-service training for teachers. We have terms that were used earlier, the ACID plan, CDAM, and FIDP. How are the ACID plan, CDAM, and FIDP connected or related? And given the situation we are currently in, which document would best help teachers plan and design for assessment and instruction? I guess that's for Dr. Montalan.
Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Pressy. For the information of everyone, In terms of preparing the classes of our senior high school core subjects, we've been coaching our teachers to follow the alignment framework. And this alignment framework has 4 components. That is the why teach, the how to assess and evaluate, the how to teach, and the what to teach. This framework leads us now to a kind of plan that ensures that everything that will be provided in the class by the teacher to the students are all aligned. And these are all aligned from the reason in teaching the subject. And this plan is what we call now the ACID plan, the Aligned Classroom Instruction Delivery Plan. But because this plan needs to be put in a document, so that this document will capture the whole plan, the plan of the teacher in teaching the subject for 1 term, then this plan is now converted into what we call the CDAM. This is now the Classroom Instruction Delivery Alignment Map. But all this, the CDAM, the ACID plan, which is now translated into a document plan, which is the CDAM, all these are all prepared in context of the in-person class, coming from the alignment framework. So what we are saying now is that given now the new context of learning environment, wherein we have to afford 3 options, 3 flexible learning options to our learners, it is necessary that this CDAM that captures the aligned activities in teaching a class or in teaching a subject needs to be appropriated in the new context or in the new normal. And this one is now translated into what we call the FIDP, or the Flexible Instructional Development Plan, where it puts more emphasis in identifying the most essential topics and gives more emphasis on flexible assessment activities and flexible learning strategies.
Now, I believe you mentioned earlier there is really no need for a new document on the FIDP because the CDAM can still be used for either of the 3 learning options, the modalities rather.
Yeah, the CDAM becomes the reference document, because whether we like it or not, we have to appropriate our teaching strategies, no, our instructional strategies and assessment activities in context of the new normal. So teachers now, the point of reference is the CDAM, but we migrate the things that are inputted in the CDAM to what we call now the FIDP.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying that, Dr. Montalan. So Rex, while there are abundant online resources which senior high school teachers and students can use, what do you think would be an effective strategy for conducting formative assessment in an offline distance learning mode? Sir, kindly unmute your microphone, Sir Rex.
Offline,
Yeah.
formative. Now, that's still, how do you put it? Wouldn't it be too early for that? There's a webinar for learning strategies that will be having next week, ba? But for formative strategies, formative assessments that are offline, wow, I'm not ready for that one.
Yeah, maybe we can have for the formative assessment activities, no, that can be done offline. We can resort to what we call the enabling tasks, but these enabling tasks are also considered as our performance check. So I mentioned in my session, in the part of my session wherein since in this flexible learning we are pushing for the use of the performance-based assessment, And so therefore, we have to ensure that we are preparing our students to successfully complete for this performance-based summative assessment. And so this formative assessment can be in the form of enabling tasks. If we are going to simplify this terminology in context of an offline setup, no, of coming up with an assessment, this can be considered as the home-based assessment, because after all, the enabling task can be done either in school or in the house, no, at home. That is why one example of this is like the laboratory. We all know that laboratory activities will be done or are usually done on campus. But there are laboratory activities that can be done also home-based. So all we just have to do is just to have the preparation of this for our students. So if I may answer that question, that formative assessment that is done offline must be in the context of enabling tasks, because if we are going to resort to, let's say, objective type of formative assessment, there we are not assured if the student is the one answering it or maybe the parents are answering it.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that.
Ma'am Presi.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
One of the things we like to do with, for example, reading materials is that we also provide at the end of this material some guide questions. The students may or may not avail of them, but we see this often in textbooks. We see this often. We do this also for our students during in-person classes. When we ask them to read, we provide guide questions. Okay, we may not be able to check immediately, nor can they check immediately if they got it right or wrong. But at least the guide questions become a way of focusing them on what matters in the materials that they are taking up. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Sir Rex. And another question, Sir Rex. For those schools who have an online platform like an LMS,
Yes.
okay, whether it's a paid version or an open source or a free version, what tips can you give teachers when facilitating online discussion forums?
Well, let's start with the condition that we face when with our students whenever they go online. Many of our students really have poor internet connectivity, and so purely online mode of discussion, for example, can be very expensive or perhaps even a problem. Students, for example, who rely on prepaid loads would discover that, especially if they do video conferences, after a day or two, the load is already gone. And then even those who have no problem with the load, the site houses, for example, may have a problem with connectivity, and so we may end up with choppy audio and video arrangements. Nevertheless, if we are positive about it, I would go for threaded conversations, really. The kind of conversations that do not rely on audio and video. Just like what we do with Facebook, for example, or with Google Chats, or with those things, wherein the conversations are done textually, and so the internet connection is not really a big problem, and people can just come in. There's a new app in Google, the Google Chat. it replaces Google Hangouts, for example, wherein conversations can be threaded. In other words, um, you can start a topic and then people would respond based on the topic. If you want a new topic, you can open a new thread. That in that way, the the responses are kept so on topic, and at the same time, people can just simultaneously perhaps just contribute, or perhaps even later on they can just continue the thread of the conversation.
Yeah, it could be an asynchronous discussion.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Dr. Sheena, another question for you. Earlier, you mentioned that even when they are online, teachers may still use in-person or face-to-face strategies. In other words, teachers bring students to a new modality of learning, yet they're still using the old modality. What should senior high school teachers watch out for to avoid getting into this trap? Ma'am, kindly unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah. Number one, it's very important that the teacher must have the right mindset. I'm sorry to say it, no? Must have the right mindset with regard to flexible learning. Because based on our experience, when a teacher brings all the experiences that she or he had, and even all the preparations that she or he had prior to the online teaching, no, into his online teaching, problems arise. You know why? Because it is just simply transferring the class into an online setup. And when the teacher is going to do that, the teacher will be tempted to do synchronous teaching. And when the teacher will do all the time synchronous teaching, that's where the problem comes in. Because number one, the first context that I mentioned, the second context that I mentioned was the connectivity of the students. And not everybody have a Wi-Fi connection. So in that context then, if we are talking of the first flexible learning option, which is the online, and you will just simply bring all your previous preparations to online setup, the teacher will be tempted to do synchronous teaching. And when the teacher will do will communicate all things, no, to students through synchronous teaching, that's where the first problem comes in. So what are we supposed to do then as senior high school teachers? First, we need to have the right mindset of the flexible learning, and that is the reason why I showed you a slide to emphasize in there the difference between the flexible learning vis-a-vis the in-person learning. No? It's very important that we have to take note that in the flexible learning, the schedule is the number one that is highly affected. There's a shortening of actual or real-time contact with the students. With that shortening then of actual real time, or the real time, I mean, contact with the students, it is necessary that the teacher must come up with a plan for that. And the one that we are suggesting is that it is necessary that from the curriculum guide, you have to identify the most essential topics. These most essential topics are the ones that will ensure us that the learning competencies that need to be developed in every student will still be developed even if you reduce the number of real-time contact with the students. So right mindset is very important in there. No? So by having the right mindset, that would imply that we should know what are those in the in-person classes that can no longer be done, or that can be limited, no, in doing in the flexible learning. So we provided you a slide on that to differentiate the two.
Thank you. Okay, next question, perhaps for Sir Rex. This is actually coming from a sister. Do the students need to buy textbooks if the teacher will resort to Google Classroom?
Uh, there are many available online textbooks these days, especially with there have been publishers, for example, who have made many of their textbooks available online for free. And then there are also other websites that have shared their learning materials. Uh, so the way I see it, we may not be able to use the usual canons, the standard textbooks that we have been using in person, but there are many online alternatives available. Uh, and and we also recognize, for example, that many publishers have already converted many textbooks into audiovisual materials that are also available online. There are, if you like, there are many learning commons now available.
Or perhaps
And
for,
Miss Presi,
yes, ma'am.
and Miss Presi, if I may add, in this flexible learning, I would like to emphasize that, our teachers are really the instructional designers in here. If there is one greater challenge that we have to face in this flexible learning, our teachers who are the experts of their own field or their specialization, no, in teaching the subject, are highly encouraged to come up with their own materials to be accessed by their students, because after all, it is the teacher who knows very well the context of his or her students. So if we are still going to require our students to access, textbooks that we used to have before, maybe those can just be used as references. But as textbook, for me personally, I would like to understand that the textbook will really come from the minds of our teachers. So we encourage our teachers to be innovative and to be creative in mentoring our students, no, in teaching the subject. So I personally discourage our teachers to still require textbooks from our students. After all, as what Sir Rola mentioned, there are a number of open access materials, no, in the web, so they can still make use of that as their references. But for textbook, which is maybe we call it as textbook in the in-person classes, but in the flexible learning setup, I would like to call it as the learning materials prepared by the teachers. There's no best substitute for that. When it comes to flexible learning, it will always be the teacher who knows well what must be given and what must be emphasized to the students.
Okay, thank you for emphasizing that, Dr. Montalan. For the next question, either of you perhaps may want to answer this. Are we going to change the components of our grading system? It's a question from one of our viewers.
Yeah. With regard to the components of our grading system, well, I am not in the position to answer that maybe in details or specifically, because I'm not from DepEd. It will always be the DepEd, no, that can release a DO on that. But in context of the flexible learning that we have shared with you right now, I would like to understand that given this flexible learning, well, basically it will have some impact on the old way of grading our students. As I emphasized in the part of my session, because this is now flexible learning, and after all, we're teaching the subject to our students for a reason, then first and foremost, the teacher knows very well what to assess, no, in every student. What are those things that will be expected from the students? And all those expectations can be done or can be demonstrated by the student through a performance-based summative assessment, through a performance task, which will happen at the end, or which will be completed at the end of the term. So if I may be asked, if we are going to go back to the real context, no, of assessment, I would like to assess my students at the end of the term through that summative assessment, provided that in that performance-based summative assessment, I assure and based on my FIDP, I will be preparing enabling tasks to be done by my students that will help me monitor the progress of the learning of the students, and that will give me feedback if my students are already prepared to complete the summative performance task, no, the summative performance based activity. So along that line, if I may be asked, I would like to believe that in terms of grading our students, I would like to grade our students in context of the quality of the summative performance task, and that will be the basis of the final grade of the students. But how about the formative assessment in the form of enabling tasks or performance check? Will they not be graded? Will they not be included in the final grade? Well, if I may be asked, we can do away including by including those formative enabling tasks in the computation of the final grade. After all, the quality of the performance tasks that will be provided by our students at the end of the term will always be based on how the student was able to demonstrate the developmental what do you call this, the development, I mean, of the competencies that will be asked from the students to demonstrate through the performance task. So the formative assessment will be used to monitor the progress of learning of the students and the readiness of the students to complete successfully the performance task that will serve as the summative assessment. So if I will be asked, if I am, let's say, if I'm going to rework on it, I would like to base only the final grade on the final assessment, which is the summative assessment. There will be only one summative assessment, but provided that there will be enabling tasks, maybe one enabling task for every grading period. So there will be 3 enabling tasks that will now serve as an aggregate demonstration of learning of students from the cluster of most essential topics that are scheduled per grading period.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Often, Ma'am Presi,
Yes.
we grade we grade the amount of effort that students put in, but very little on the quality of learning that they have picked up. So while it is not, we are not in a position really to be qualified to declare about those things, but it can be it can be noticed, it can be observed that many of the grades that we often give really just because the student was a part of it, then he gets a grade. Just because the student submitted this, he gets a grade. But often we never pay attention to whether he really learned or not. No? Perhaps it's time to look, to be serious once more on what grades really mean as indicators of learning, not just of effort.
Thank you, Sir Rex. We have, I think, just about around 2 or 3 questions left. You may want to answer these, Sir Rex. Some teachers may be familiar with this, though some are probably new to this, especially who are doing online for the first time. How do you check for plagiarism in the written work submitted by students, in the written work submitted online by students?
With in Google Classroom, there's a provision for originality reports. In other words, Google Classroom has embedded into the system a plagiarism software. But there's a caveat here. They only allow up to 3 originality reports per student, per class, per semester. Okay, so one has to be very careful when to use those originality reports. There is, however, a more common way that we use for detecting plagiarism among students, and that is by using Google search. You see, if you read the works of students and become familiar with them, you know when it is really their words, their ideas, and you know when it is not theirs, or at least you have a suspicion. Ah, the the language is just too fluent, right? Or the words used are just beyond the student's level, so that they become triggers. No, so often what you need to do is just copy the portion that alerted you, search it through Google. Oftentimes you'll be led to the resource, because oftentimes also our students just use Google, no, to search for the what they will submit to you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Um, I think I can answer this one for you. Will we be provided with templates of the SIDAM? I think, Dr. Sheena, it's okay to share the templates of the SIDAM. We can upload the template. Or anyway, we've been providing this in our senior high school inset in the regional trainings. And one last question, Dr. Sheena. Paki-explain po uli ang flexible learning strats ng FIDP, perhaps in a nutshell, ma'am.
Okay. For the flexible learning strategies in the FIDP, of course, we have to go back to the three options of the flexible learning. No, we have three options: the online learning. The second one is the distance learning. And in that distance learning is a combination of an online and also accessing materials, reading materials offline. The other one is the blended, wherein in the blended you still have there the online, and then you just pair it with maybe fewer classes, in-person classes. So in this context of the three learning options, flexible learning options, our flexible learning strategies must be coming from that context. So we're not saying that everything that we're done in the in-person classes will no longer be utilized also in the flexible learning class. Because in the flexible learning class, the third option is, which is the blended learning, it still utilizes the in-person class. But what matters most is the combination, the pairing of learning strategies or teaching strategies that are best suited on the nature of the flexible learning option that is being utilized by the teacher. That is why when I presented those three learning options, I presented them in the context of the ISLA, the instruction, the student learning, and then the assessment. So in a nutshell, those flexible learning learning strategies must be defined or redefined, re-engineered, re-innovated by the teachers in context of the flexible learning option that best suit to the class, and that will be best or that will be explained in detail in the separate webinar.
All right. On that note, I want to thank you both, Dr. Montalan and Sir Rex, for joining us in this webinar this morning. And I want to also thank our viewers today, especially the senior high school teachers and senior high school coordinators and principals. And thank you also to Ms. Doris, May, Terence, and Brian for assisting us today. Join us again next week on June 24, that's a Wednesday, for 2 more sessions in the senior high school webinar series of PEAC. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe always. Thank you, Sir Rex and Dr. Sheena.
Thank you. You're welcome.